Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust, and we're talking about land conservation on Cape Cod. Mark, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
Can you give us a little history of land conservation on the Cape?
Well, it's a long history. It starts almost over 100 years ago when the town of Provincetown was searching around for a new water supply, and they decided that they needed to import water from Truro and dug the first municipal well there in 1909. And there was an act of the state legislature that set aside land for that first well field at Knowles Crossing. So with that kind of as a beginning, land conservation for various purposes on Cape Cod has gone in fits and starts up until about 50 years ago. And interestingly, in 1967, the town of Dennis put together the first municipal land acquisition package. Men like Kurt Livingston, Norton Nickerson, Henry Kelly brought forward a package of lands, including the Indian lands, Crow's Pasture, other places that they thought were important to preserve, and went to town meeting with this big special vote to buy conservation land. It was kind of not brand new, but new in the sense of making a concerted effort to think about strategically what lands in the town were important to preserve and negotiate their purchases. And town meeting was very thoughtful and favorable toward that idea and bought those important properties. So as the post-war development boom ran throughout the Cape, and we started to see large tracts of woodland, particularly in the interior of the Cape, being gobbled up with large sprawling subdivisions. Towns were getting nervous that they were losing the open space that makes the Cape so special. And so there were a number of different responses to that sense of anxiety. And one was this going to town meeting and having town meeting vote to raise some money to buy some of these properties. Another response involved some of the innovative zoning that the Cape did back in the 1970s and 80s. Not just creating larger lot sizes, most towns now have 1 acre zoning, but also being concerned about where their water supply was coming from and understanding that it wasn't being imported through a pipe from the Quabbin Reservoir here on Cape Cod. Where we live is where our groundwater is and where our drinking water supply comes from. So what you do on the land affects what you do, what kind of water quality you have. And so towns were innovative about passing bylaws, protection bylaws near the well fields, determining that there shouldn't be hazardous chemicals being stored in those areas, but also thinking about how much land is needed to preserve that water quality the water tastes so good here on the Cape. It's part of it's due to our geology, but the other part of it is because we haven't allowed development to encroach right up along the wells. So, meanwhile, on the nonprofit side, there were a number of small local land trusts that were getting off the ground. The Chatham Conservation Foundation, Salt Pond Areas Bird Sanctuary in Falmouth. These were founded in 1962-63 as an alternative to town purchases of open space. And so now for the first time there was an alternative for local people to work with a nonprofit group to donate land for conservation. And those groups have been very successful, so much so that now, 50 years later, every town on Cape Cod has its own local land conservation trust.
And I knew Irma Lovell, who started Salt Pond. I know she was very proud of having started one of the first groups like that on the Cape to conserve property, and she was sort of an early environmentalist before people were really talking about that too much on the Cape. And then, of course, the town of Falmouth, on the occasion of their 300th anniversary, and now I'm skipping ahead a little bit, they started the 300 Committee to try to preserve land as well. And I guess that was happening in various Cape towns.
Right. But, you mentioned Irma Lovell. I did not have the pleasure of working with her a little before my time, but It's interesting that she was a realtor in Falmouth. And we've had great support from the real estate community in this idea that we need to preserve open space here on the Cape. And to some people, that sounds counterintuitive. But I have to tell you that the business community, the bankers, the real estate industry has been very supportive because they know that the golden goose here on the Cape is its scenic beauty, its outdoor appeal. And that's what attracts people. That's what makes it a thriving economy, is to attract people here based on our environment. There's the old saying that the environment is the economy on Cape Cod, and it means different things to different people. But underlying that, I think, is a sense of what keeps people here or attracts them is the great outdoor experiences that we still have ready to offer here on the Cape.
And when the land bank came in, that was a fairly controversial situation there with the land bank vote and all the towns had to vote. That was definitely not coming in as a done deal, as I recall.
Right. And there was opposition to the first iteration of the land bank, which was to be based on sales of real estate. And most of the realtors did not like that idea because it was being taxing one segment of the economic activity here on the Cape. So
what's interesting also is on Nantucket, where they ended up with their land bank coming from the real estate transactions and where the property values are so high over there that they've ended up with quite a pot of money from doing it that way.
Right.
Yes,
so the vineyard in Nantucket based their land bank on transfers of property. Here on the Cape, our second attempt was to place it as a surcharge on property tax so that everybody pays, everybody enjoys the benefit. That was the theory. And imagine going to a statewide election in November of 1998, and each one of the 15 towns, some very liberal, some very conservative, all understanding that it was important to preserve open space. And all 15 towns voted to place this surcharge on their own backs, on their property tax, for the very important activity of preserving open space in their town.
And it was a little bit of a surprise if I sort of remember following the polls and saying, wow, they all voted for it. It wasn't a preordained thing that was going to happen. But when it did happen, it certainly made a lot of sense for the whole region that everyone was on board with this surtax.
Yeah, and you know, to me, I call it the ultimate opinion survey. If you ask somebody, do you like open space? 100% of the people would probably say yes. But if you say, are you willing to pay and increase your own local property tax to preserve open space, that's a much different question. And the fact that a majority in every one of the 15 towns on the Cape said yes was very heartening, I think, to show that people get it down here, that they understand the connection. If you want to protect resources, you need to protect land. Just as 100 years ago, the legislature decided that you needed to protect land in Truro to preserve water quality for Provincetown, so too have people rallied around the cause of preserving water supplies, access to ponds, scenic views, important rich farm soils, rare species habitat, all the different things that makes the Cape special relies on a land base that's protected to support those resources.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal, and we're talking about land conservation on Cape Cod with Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts. Now, eventually, the land bank rolled into the Community Preservation Act, which all of the Cape towns now have. So explain that a little bit.
Well, the idea was that because based on the success of the land bank here on the Cape, the rest of the state looked a little bit with envy and said, gee, why can't we have something like that? And so the legislature approved a bill called the Community Preservation Act, which does more than just set aside monies for open space. It also enables towns to use the money for affordable housing projects, historic preservation projects, and new recreational facilities in the town. And so the Cape towns have evolved their land bank into the Community Preservation Act, primarily because the state supplies some matching funds that enhances the ability of towns to do those projects.
And it started with quite a large pot of money of matching funds, as I recall, and now it's gotten quite a bit smaller. Is that right?
Yes. Well, because more towns throughout the state have adopted the Community Preservation Act. There are more towns splitting the same pie, so the percentages have gone down, but it's stabilized now between 30 and 40% state match to local dollars. So it's a nice continuing infusion.
If we look at Cape Cod and where we stand with about 1/3 developed, 1/3 conserved, and about 1/3 really up for grabs as to what will happen, is that right?
Well, it is. It's a nice shorthand. That 1/3 up for grabs, I think, is actually much less nowadays. Not only has development proceeded, but since those numbers were developed, but a lot of that land that has not yet been developed or protected is wetlands, and wetlands are at this point still not available for development. I say that because, as we talk about the need for wastewater management here on the Cape, and I really do think that's the pressing environmental issue for the next 50 years here in the Cape. We don't want to suffer the unintended consequences that sewering in some places may lead to, particularly with opening up new areas that previously were considered marginal for development because they have access to a sewer that they can be then thought about for construction. And I think that the very thoughtful work that the Cape Cod Commission and local water quality committees are doing in thinking about how do we grapple with wastewater management. If 85% of the Cape is still on septic systems, and we know that septic systems do not control the nitrogen coming out of the waste stream there, and that nitrogen is causing the poor water quality in a lot of our bays and ponds, then we need to deal with the wastewater impacts on our natural resources. And just preserving open space in and of itself won't clean up the water. It will prevent water from getting worse, but it's not going to clean up damage that's been done. So we do need to go back and figure out that we're the generation that polluted the water on the Cape, and it's going to really be up to us in the next few years to figure out how to pay for it, what techniques work in which places, where's the best cost-benefit for different techniques and different water bodies. But we all have to work together. It is a Cape problem. It's not just a town problem.
And what does the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts do to help land conservation?
Well, we're a go-to shop for people interested in this fairly technical and narrow field of land conservation. My staff and I work together mostly with private landowners on behalf of the local nonprofit land trusts and also sometimes on behalf of the town open space committees. And what we're doing is designing proposals for landowners to consider, which involves the right land conservation technique, whether it's a donation of the property, a bargain sale of the property, a fair market value sale of the property, or a conservation restriction, placing the land in somebody's will to be preserved by the estate. And all of these different techniques can be mixed and matched to meet the family's needs. It also intersects with the very valuable and significant tax benefits that are available to people. When you donate a piece of land or otherwise move it out of the construction potential, there are federal, state, and local tax breaks that encourage that kind of behavior. At the federal level, there's a charitable deduction based on the value of the land at the time of the donation that can be taken over 6 years. At the state level, there's a new state tax credit. It's only been around for the last 3 years, but it's $75,000 maximum for people who are placing land into conservation. And locally, if land is donated or restricted voluntarily, there's a property tax relief. So there's a lot of great tools and a lot of great tax benefits for landowners to explore. And part of my work is to work privately with them in their kitchens and sitting down and going over the different scenarios and what makes sense for them.
It's obviously free of charge.
It is free of charge, and that's one of the beauties of the having the local land trusts available. That they're boots on the ground in their local villages and communities, so they know a lot of these landowners and have some relationships perhaps with them, and being able to invite people like myself in to discuss these different techniques and the tax advantages, I think is very useful. Not everywhere has access to that information. If you have to rely on accountants and tax lawyers, they may not know some of the newer advantages.
Now, which towns on the Cape would you say have been the most successful with land conservation?
All of them.
Okay.
And it means different things in different towns. Of course, a town like Provincetown, which is thought as being completely built out, it's interesting that there is a very important greenway that's between the Route 6 and downtown, kind of straddling the old railroad bed there, that has a lot of interesting habitats, quaking bogs and cedar swamps, and so Provincetown has devoted a lot of its open space monies to very interesting habitats, Champaigner Pond, for instance, and the Whistlepath Woods, which has a wonderful cedar swamp. So, but they tend to be very small. In other towns where there are large tracts of land still left, towns like Brewster and Sandwich, they're setting aside larger tracts of land for multiple open space values. But even in towns like downtown Falmouth, where the 300 Committee has created a wonderful little urban park right on Route 28 near the mall, T-Ticket Park. The old driving range has been renovated now into a wonderful walking and sitting park. So there's always something to do. I think of the Route 28 task force in Yarmouth, led by Dick Martin, a local realtor, who has undeveloped a lot of some of the dilapidated properties and created these very nice sitting parks with views out to the water along the Mill Creek and Parker's River. So there's always opportunities. And open space means different things to different people. But each one of the Cape Cod towns makes those decisions on their own. And I think they've made great decisions.
And in the last minute or so, what message would you like to leave with listeners about land preservation on Cape Cod?
Well, I think any landowner who still owns significant acreage, and by that I mean anything more than 2, here on the Cape in the 21st century, they know they have something special. It means something to them, typically. It's not just leftover land. It's available for speculation. And if that land does mean something to you, you should always reach out to your local land trust or your open space committee at Town Hall, or my group, the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts, and learn about some of the ways that you might be able to preserve the land you love and generate some significant financial advantages to yourself. And that's the way we're going to save the Cape. There's just not enough money to buy everything that needs to be bought. But through the collective action of lots of private individuals making conscious decisions about how to save and preserve the land they love, I think that's the message that I'd like to get out.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts. Thank you so much for being with me here today.
Oh, Laura, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.